All right, episode 14 of the Lucas Grandsire podcast. We know what it is. Super creative name, super creative guy hosting the thing. Very excited about today's guest. It's how does he say it? Your friend and mine, New York Rick, Eric Jackman. What's going on, sir? How are you?
That is how Ariel Helwani says it. I'm doing well. Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here with you.
It's funny because I say New York, and I notice when he says it, he says New York, and I think it's gotten to the point where I hear it so many times that the York, I feel like he's screaming it at me, on purpose.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that Ariel says in an interesting way. One of the ones that people have picked up on is Tuesday
Oh
instead
yeah.
of Tuesday. So I'm not surprised you kind of picked up on a little bit of the New York being off. Um, but yeah, it's funny that you picked up on that.
But it's the New York being off, right? It's not me as someone that lives in the South and is originally an immigrant. It's not me not knowing how to pronounce, York instead of, York.
No, that is firmly an Ariel Helwani thing. Assume anything that Ariel says strangely is an Ariel Helwani thing.
There we go. How has it been for you working with someone like that? Because Ariel, like, people always talk about, like, oh, the MMA media and stuff like that. But I feel like he's transcended that. Like, this guy's a superstar. I heard everywhere he goes, people want to take pictures and stuff like that. Like, sounds like he's a real, like, a goat in terms of the media game.
Yeah, within the MMA space, there's very few people who have the instant recognizability as Ariel Helwani for a few reasons. Like obviously the fighters are the heroes of the sport, right? The fighters are the ones that everybody, tunes in to see. It's not, the promotions, it's not the media members. They're the ones that people tune in to see and put on the product. But because of Ariel hosting so many things and doing so many interviews, he's had much more regular interactions with fans. They've seen him just much more. The fighters don't have as many opportunities. Advent of social media kind of changed that a little bit. But Ariel's just somebody that people grew up with and saw over and over and over again, so they feel like they know him. And when you travel with him, yeah, there's a lot of people that run up and want to have some conversation and talk to Ariel Helwani because they feel like they know him. And for all intents and purposes, that was the goal. That was what he wanted to do. He wanted to have that special bond with the fans, and nobody has done it better than Ariel over this time. But yeah, people mob him. It's definitely not it's definitely not just walking down the street with just any other friend that I have. But he's one of a kind, and he definitely takes the time to talk to people because, as I said, that was kind of the intention. He wanted that direct relationship, and he was able to build that.
Well, surely that must have trickled over to you too, right? Like I'm sure there's got to be someone shouting New York Rick anytime you go to a grocery store or something. Like it must have trickled down to you.
At the grocery store, no. I'm gonna say I live in a remote enough area that that doesn't happen. From time to time, I'll be out somewhere and somebody will recognize me. It happens much more so around the MMA space. If I'm out, especially if I'm with Helwani, there's an instant kind of recognition there. But yeah, I mean, no, my monochrome, very small level of recognizability is nothing compared to Ariel's, and quite frankly, that's the way it should be. I'm kind of the behind the scenes guy, and Ariel's the face of all that. But I appreciate anytime somebody does recognize me. I certainly appreciate it more so just to kind of have a chat with another MMA fan, because in my personal life, there's not a ton of MMA fans. Like I don't know how your personal life is, but I find that a lot of people who work in MMA or MMA media, most of their friends are not MMA fans. Like, we try to convert a few here or there, but most of the time, those interactions are happening on Twitter. Those interactions are happening on forums, on Reddit, on social media other than Twitter. And not in real life. So anytime somebody does recognize me, I just take that as an opportunity to talk shop and chop it up and talk about MMA.
It's funny because you're right. In real life, like in my personal life, like the only MMA fans is like if I drag people to see a pay per view. Like I have the poster behind me. That's because I dragged my friends to Buffalo Wild Wings, and then
Yep.
half of the car ride is just you're trying to sell the fights. And I'm not one of those people. I'm not going to say the names because I know you're not going to remember. So you have to use things like during the fight, it's like black shorts against red shorts. Like I find myself trying to sell it to these people. Like and then I had them over to watch a very long time ago when McGregor fought Aldo. And my
Mm.
friends were talking during the whole pay per view because they're not necessarily MMA fans, and I was starting to get irked. I was like, shut the fuck up! I'm trying to watch these fights. Like, I'm not inviting you guys to come drink in my house. Like, I'm trying to enjoy these fights. Like, what are you guys doing? So it's funny you say that. Exactly with Twitter, you feel like you're surrounded by MMA people, and
Yeah.
then in real life, you realize like you go out there and you say like Israel Adesanya, and people are like, what country is that? Is that a city
Yep.
in Israel? And then it's definitely strange.
Yep. there's a long way to go, but there's been a ton of progress. Like just the UFC being on ESPN now, upcoming this Saturday, UFC is going to be on ABC, which is a big deal. It's continuing to kind of make those steps that it needs to make. Where all of a sudden, one day we're going to look back and people are going to say Israel Adesanya, and everybody's going to know, and people are going to. Conor McGregor's probably already reached that point, but will even further that cause. It's funny that they were talking over Aldo McGregor. Hopefully, not for the 13 seconds that mattered on that one.
That one was weird because, so we're watching Jacare Romero, and I'm trying to sell it to these people. I'm like, damn, this is
Yeah,
about as high level middleweight at the time. When we get to the main event, and his walkout, I love. They turn off the lights and it's intense, and they're still talking. I'm like, god damn it, and it is the intensity. You got to enjoy that. We get to the fight, and they're like, all right, Lucas, what can we expect? Boom, boom, boom. Everybody started screaming and jumping,
yeah,
and then everybody has their theory. Oh, Aldo slipped. It's like, no, guys, that's not the slipping that occurred in that fight. That was
yeah.
McGregor, but after that, people are like, "Oh, when's McGregor fighting again?" And then McGregor he fights like once a year, so you really make sure you capture everyone at the time when he is fighting.
Yeah, and that's coming up again soon.
Well, I assume for you, like your social media numbers, obviously the social media guy with ESPN MMA, like you
Yeah.
must see a big hike at this point, or at some point, it's going to start getting to that point where just saying Connor, like things are going to explode.
Yeah, I don't think it would surprise anybody for them to know that socially UFC 246 was a huge event for ESPN's MMA social handles. Like the content around that card, the reaction, the pre-fight, the follow-up, all of it kind of related to that card was some of the biggest numbers we've ever had. And that's even accounting for the fact that the account had such like huge growth toward the end of the year. Even the beginning, because that fight was in the beginning of the year, even though it wasn't at when we were our biggest, it still had numbers that compared to later events, which is absolutely crazy. The magnitude of a Conor McGregor fight is unlike any other, and I don't think I'm shocking anybody by saying that. But yeah, we'll start to see it now. Leading into fight, by time fight night comes around, it's going to be insane. Like all the engagement is going to be huge, and then the reactionary stuff is where the numbers
Oh yeah.
really go monstrous, because whatever happens there, if Conor wins, if Conor loses, Dustin, gets revenge, and now all of a sudden he's in the driver's seat. Conor's comeback is halted. There's a lot of reactionary content that people are going to be interested from that.
I mean, we've reached that point where even myself, like, I'm grinding, trying to build up this YouTube channel, which is so difficult. I think people forget to tell you that when you get started, but I'm like, okay, how can I capitalize on it? And then it's like, I'm not going to be talking to Dustin Poirier or Conor McGregor. And then I was trying to think, like, should I do, maybe when I do interviews, I ask guys like, hey, can you give me a quick clip of,
Mm-hmm.
who you got winning it? But everybody's going to be doing that. Am I written? I don't tend to do stuff like that. So is that the way to go? But you definitely try to think like, all right, you could reach a boom if you have the right kind of content to, go along with this fight.
Yeah, drifting onto trends and things that people are discussing is always a good idea. But as somebody who is a content creator, not in the same way. Like what you're doing is very separate from what I'm doing. You are trying to build something that didn't exist, right? You're trying to build
Yeah.
something that's around your brand. You're trying to build something up that is exclusively yours, and you're building up. I'm coming from the perspective of ESPN is backing an account where that has its own cloud, and we have resources and access to things. So it is a little bit different. But in terms of content creation, one of the things that I find is like, yes, that stuff will give you mileage, and you'll be able to capitalize on that. But more than anything, just doing your own thing, like being specifically you and doing what you do best is always going to translate better. If you can find ways to fold that Conor McGregor conversation into it, that will enhance it, and that'll be good. But just being Lucas, doing the interviews that you do, like focusing on that is the thing that will end up paying the most dividends, rather than kind of like trying too hard to go in that direction, and losing the plot of kind of like what you started. And that speaks to the same thing that we did with the MMA hour with Ariel. Like it was the thing, and we just kept doing that thing as best as we possibly could. And when it transferred over to ESPN, Ariel Helwani's MMA show, just kept trying to do that the best it possibly could, and then hoping that the fans would stick with us, and they did.
Another thing I noticed from the numbers thing is if you literally put Hamza Shemaev in the title, obviously it has to be relevant, but people will click, and people will tell you in the comments, I clicked for Hamza. It's like, I
Yes.
talked to Neil Magny yesterday, and he sort of brought up Hamza. So all of a sudden you got the little light bulb, and it's like, you could get a few cheap clicks if you just ask him real quick. Jeff Neal, same thing. He brought up Hamza. So I'm like, let's talk about it. And literally just sticking that in the title, you boosted by a couple views, and especially if when you're trying to build up a YouTube channel, it's like, you try to avoid the clickbait, but it's like, if you bring up Hamza, and you just toss that over to me, I'm going to catch it. I'm not going to move out of the way. Like, it's a cheap way to get clicks, but it works. And as long as I feel like if you're not trying to entice people to talk shit when that's not their game, there shouldn't be anything wrong with it.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have this idea that of what quote unquote clickbait is,
Right.
as
Yeah.
clickbait just means like saying somebody's name, saying Conor McGregor's name, to try and get people interested. That's not really what clickbait is. Clickbait is when you frame something up as one thing, and then when you click to the article, you find out that it's not that. You just tricked them into clicking.
Yeah.
If somebody says, if an interview with Neil Magny or Jeff Neal, they say, "I'd like to fight Hamzat Shemaev," and you make that your headline, that's not clickbait. The guy
Yeah.
said that. That's a very straightforward journalistic practice, to put the what's the most interesting part of the content you've created up front, so people can see it. So I think a lot of people use that term clickbait and say clickbait this, clickbait that. But the reality is, as long as you're not misleading people and your journalistic ethics are sound, you're leading with the things that you think people will be most interested in, and the comments reflect that. That's fine. Like, I mean, people have to get over that. People have to get this idea, this quote unquote idea of clickbait, kind of out of their head. That's not the world we live in.
No, you're right. It's you know, and I tend to use that term too. But it's like I think people think like you bait them into clicking, and that's not what it
Yeah,
is. Really, clickbait.
yeah,
It's like the seventh minute will shock you, and it's like the seventh minute did not shock me. He didn't say
yeah,
anything
yeah.
crazy.
That you get sold something that wasn't
Yeah.
actually what it was. 100%.
Or and people are like, I think it was MMA Junkie that were like, you guys need to recognize, is it clickbait or am I just, is it a nice editorialized title that entices you to
Yeah,
want to click on it? Because otherwise you'll read the headlines, you'll keep scrolling. And then what does that do for you? That does nothing. Like, you have to give people enough they want to click on it, but at the same time you click on the article and you don't want to find zero mention of Hamza. And it's like, what the hell are you doing?
exactly, exactly. No, you're right.
When you were working as a producer for the MMA Hour, especially with
Yeah.
SB Nation MMA fighting, were you booking the interviews too, or were you sort of in charge of making sure everything looked right when it went live?
Yeah, I was much more on the production side of things, making sure that the show flowed smoothly, and graphics and things like that. Ariel has, from start to finish, all the way back from AOL days when the show first started, all the way to now until DC and Helwani became that Monday show. But even on the Wednesday shows now, from start to finish, Ariel Helwani has always been the booker. And I think if you ask him now, he's got a sigh of relief from not having to sweat every single Sunday about how many guests he's going to book on Monday, because we would go at certain times 5.5 hours in the SB Nation days. So now the Wednesday show is a little bit lighter. He has a little less on his plate, but from start to finish, it's always been Ariel. He's always been the one who has had his hands on that and wanted to make sure that the guests that he was presenting on those shows were the guests that people wanted to hear from. There was never involvement from ESPN or Vox Media saying, have this person on or have this person on. It was always Ariel, because he wanted to give the best possible show.
Well, what I loved about his show, especially a long time ago, was when like you'd have like a high profile fight and a fighter loses, and then Monday he's gonna do Ariel's show and he's gonna be really, they're especially candid. You know what I mean? They talk, and I feel like those were some of the best interviews when guys
Yeah,
sat
I
down and.
sorry for cutting you off. I was just gonna say, I typically find that the losers have a much more interesting perspective,
Yeah.
not from the fact that, like, we want to revel in their losing or celebrate their failure, because it is a tough moment for them. But they typically are more reflective. If somebody wins something, they typically go, "Okay, I won. Let's move on," and they don't really, like, open that box a little bit to check into it. Now,
Yeah.
certainly, I think fighters down the line break down their footage and break down their tape and go, okay, these are the things I can do better. But in that immediate aftermath, typically the losing fighter is going to have something a little more reflective to say and kind of, talk about where they're going to go from here in their career. So I agree with you 100%. Those Monday interviews after a huge fight where everything was at stake, the title, and possibly even more at times, reputation on the line. Ariel speaking to winner, loser, whoever it is, and typically he got both most of the time. It was special. It was special and still is.
And the way Ariel did it, he had such like a human, like he made you feel safe. You know what I mean? Like millions of people are
Yeah.
listening, but you're safe with me. We can talk about this. And it was like, I don't know. I feel like the fighters are more honest. They're ready to talk about it. Like after the win, it's like, you got to promote the brand and then, whoever's next. But I feel like that time that, the only goal was like, okay, let's just talk about it and let me explain kind of what happened on my end.
Yeah, and a lot of that comes from what I was talking about. He books the show. So that
Yeah.
means he has to maintain all these relationships, whether it comes to news, whether it comes to just checking in on people, being personally, connected to people. He's developed those relationships and cultivated those relationships over years. So it's a lot easier for Ariel to say, like, in the string of a million texts that he sent somebody, hey, I'd like you to come on my show, and they'll know that it'll be handled correctly by somebody who has that relationship with them, rather than all of a sudden an unknown blue bubble pops up and says, hey, you want to come on my show? They've never seen it before. They don't recognize the number. It's a lot harder to kind of, make that happen. But Ariel's, the best in the business for a reason.
Well, I feel like the fact that he's the one reaching out, like if it was a producer, then you feel like you don't really have a relationship with Ariel, right?
Yeah.
Like you just pop on and show, and then you almost feel like it's not genuine. But when it's him, hey man, come on my show, and especially the name he is at this point, it's like it must feel better for the fighters too.
Absolutely. It's all about that relationship building. And yeah, that is probably the reason he held on to that responsibility for so long, because I know for a fact it becomes hard, it becomes tiresome. He has to text these guys right after they finish their fight on Saturday to kind of, ask them for something. Now, granted, it's something that the world is going to want, it's something that they'll want to talk about it, but it's tough. It's tough to kind of do that. But one of the main reasons I think he never handed that off is because of that. He wants it to feel like, hey, I'm coming to you and asking for this. It's not my producer. It's not some random suit at ESPN or Vox Media or wherever that's just coming and saying like, we need you for the show. It's Ariel saying, hey, I really want to discuss this with you.
At the same time, I feel like it's a positive, and for the fighters that don't get, reached out to and don't get booked, they take it personally, right? I think it was Kevin Lee came on the show and he was like, "You never wanted to talk to me before, and now I'm here." Like some guys, they take that personal when in reality, like maybe it's not that deep.
Sometimes they do take it personal. It's funny though. You mentioned Kevin Lee, and this happens every single time, and I've seen him many times over the years. I worked with Ariel for 10 years now. Um, they always become the ones that are the most frequent guests after
Oh
that.
yeah.
Ben Askren, Kevin Lee. It's always the people who are like, you didn't want to talk to me. Then all of a sudden, when they kind of start getting into that flow, and they do start talking, they become the most regular guests. It always happens that way. Helwani has a way of winning them over, but I think at a certain point, the fighters also realize that it isn't personal,
Yeah.
that it's not an indictment if you're not on the show or if you're on the next week or whatever it is. It's just the reality of not being able to do 200 interviews and interview everybody on every card every week. But yeah, it's funny. Those relationships end up being the ones that end up being the stronger ones once they get past that initial thing. But Ariel's always willing to talk about it and confront it on air. Like Kevin Lee, as an example, he knew that Kevin Lee was going to come off,
Yeah.
firing shots right off the bat and say, "Hey, you never wanted to talk to me before." So he's a good sport about it, but so are the athletes for sure.
I think my favorite relationship with his is him and Rampage. Like, how can you
Yeah,
not love the back and forth between and Rampage? He does such a good job of. Is he fucking around? Is he serious? Like, you feel like if they saw each other on the street, how would they react? Like, I love the way those two interact.
yeah, that is one of my favorites over the years, just because they've also had the opportunity to do it in person so many times.
Yeah.
Ariel's been at so many Rampage fights backstage. They went to New York and did the matzo ball soup at Katz's. There's so, and I think did they go to Memphis? Did they end up doing the one with Rampage at home? Probably not, but either way, there's been so many opportunities for those two to have a genuine connection. But yeah, that is one of the best ones. Ariel going so far as to cost Rampage Jackson a relationship, and Rampage still salty about it.
That's right. Because didn't he make him call the girl live on the show or something like that? Like I remember it was something crazy like that.
Yeah, the girl. So the story goes that Ariel asked basically if Rampage loved her, and then he didn't answer or something to that effect. And then since then, we've had Rampage and the girl on the show on the MMA Hour back in the Vox days. So that saga continues, and without a doubt, even now, 2021, if they were to do an interview, that will be one of the topics that comes up for sure.
So during these, 5, 6 hour shows, because sometimes you guys ran really long. What are you doing this whole time? Because I assume, like, as a producer, you can't for 1 second, like, take a break or something. Like, you got to be on top of it because technically things go fast. Things go wrong very fast.
Yeah, it's funny enough. Like there was more than just me in the control room. So even in
Right.
the Vox Media days, there was 5 to 6 people running different things, whether it be running the graphics, whether it be managing the audio, checking the levels, whether it be just producing or making sure that the live stream is up, making sure that we're still live on YouTube, still live on Twitter, those types of things. Not a lot of people went to the bathroom during that time. Like we were all pretty locked in for 6 to 7 hours every single Monday at that point. To everybody's credit, I don't know how it happened, but what I was personally responsible for was a lot of quarterbacking, making sure, okay, now let's hit this. When it comes time to do the segment where we're looking at tweets, it was called Rick's Picks.
Yeah.
I'm making sure to collect those and making sure that that segment's ready to go. Pre-show, I'm building all the graphics, and then we're coming into the show ready to roll. So it was a lot of those duties that you'd expect kind of behind the scenes, but more so just keeping the train on the tracks, keeping everything running smoothly, and then popping in to chat with Ariel at the end.
And so, at what point do you start your prep? Because, like you mentioned, you have to do the graphics and everything, but at the same time, you don't really know which guests you're gonna have on until the fights happen Saturday and you guys are live Monday. Like, I assume Sunday's got to be the day where it's just all prep all day.
Yeah, it's Sunday night into Monday morning. Once Ariel has that finalized lineup, it's, okay, now these are the graphics we need to build. These are some of the B-roll assets, and these are some of the photos, and this is kind of where we're going to go with it. So Sunday night into Monday morning. And it's the same for now, DC and Helwani. I don't produce with Ariel anymore. So once I moved full time into social media, that production part of it now shifted to a completely other team at ESPN, a team of great people. And so they're the ones coordinating with Ariel now, and that extends into DC and Helwani. They know the topics that they're going to touch on Sunday night, so they need to start prepping B-roll. They need to start prepping the lower thirds and all that type of stuff to make sure the show runs smoothly. But yeah, it starts as soon as you possibly can. Once you know kind of like what the topics of the day are, that's when the prep starts.
With the new production team, am I wrong in saying there was a beef somewhere? If I wasn't mistaken, what was it? New York Rig versus, was it Corporate Jake or something like that? Something like that happened.
Yeah, there is a beef. Corporate Jake is a no talent hack that kind of does the stuff that I used to do. But everybody else around him is very good and carries him through it. But he's just a jabroni that kind of like stepped into it just because he happened to be working at ESPN. I don't even know how he got the job there. Maybe his parents know somebody. But yeah, he kind of does what I do, even though, I mean, let's be real, it's not even
Right.
close. He's not doing 6-hour shows, getting the graphics and B-roll and all that stuff ready for that, and then coming on and being on air talent. Like, he's not doing any of that, and thankfully so. We don't want to see that ugly mug. But there's a great bigger team that supports him, that makes sure that he's not out of line.
There we go. Is it tough for you to watch like other people kind of step in and do what you used to do? Because obviously it's something that you help build too, whether people, mention it or not, because they're supposed to be behind the scenes. But I assume it's gotta be very tough when you watch this thing, go off without you.
It's not tough from the perspective. That's a fantastic question, because that's the first thing I would ask somebody about. That is, it's not tough because these are my colleagues, these are people I know well. I'm joking about Jake, but he's actually really talented and really good at what he does, and as are the rest of the people on that team. So it's very easy. I knew them. I was still working on the show when it first came to ESPN, and I was kind of helping out a little bit, just kind of telling them the things Ariel likes, doesn't like, how to make the show flow, and those types of things. So I felt very comfortable in saying, like, okay, now they can take it. Not that that's like, they have bosses. I'm not the one going, no, you guys take it. But I felt comfortable with it being something that I worked on for this long, saying like, okay, this team is passionate about it. This team loves it as much as I did, and they can take it forward from here. So it wasn't as tough as it might be if it was just like clean break, I never see it again, and all of a sudden it's just this other thing. But it's in capable hands. It's in people that I know very well. I talk to them as much as I talk to Ariel. I work with them all the time, and I feel really good about where the show's at. And I also, my number one thing is how Ariel feels about everything. Because at the end of the day, like, I produced Ariel for a long time, but Ariel's my friend. And Ariel, being happy with what he's doing is the most important thing for me as a friend. As long as he's, happy to kind of do the shows, and I think he's happier than he's ever been with this DCN Helwani on Monday, being able to get interviews out on Wednesday, and then kind of popping in interviews here and there. I think he's as happy as he's ever been. Then he gets to work the NBA stuff. So I'm just happy for him, and as long as he's happy with what he's doing with the show, I'm happy for him. And on the social side, I get to still be involved and benefit from it. When they have great moments on DC and Helwani, or Ariel has a great interview on Wednesday, or any of our writers have an interview, or journalists have an interview, I get to use that content for social. So I'm still kind of in the mix in that capacity, and it helps my job in that way. So it's pretty harmonious. I'm also very happy, but more than anything, I think the people who work on the show are happy too.
Well, I think something that you touched on that I think is important that people don't realize is you said like the people that took over, they loved and appreciated the show as well, right? Like if you handed it off to people and it was, we call them corporate Jake, like, it was very corporate, like, yeah, we'll take it from here, and they kind of, you feel
Yeah.
like they don't give a shit, right? You're looking at it and it's like, like this thing that I loved, you guys don't appreciate it, but the fact they do appreciate it, like you are passing it on, so it's to say, like to the right people.
Yeah, and I don't think Ariel would do it if he wasn't comfortable as well. If he didn't feel like the people involved with it wanted to do it and wanted to be there and were passionate about it. Because at the end of the day, like he's done this for so long, he doesn't need to keep doing this. He does this because he still loves it and because he still wants to have that connection with the fans and the athletes and things like that. So if all of a sudden it was starting to feel like, hey, this is not what I wanted to do, I'm sure he would be the first one to say, I'm not sure if I want to keep doing this. So yeah, it's we're in a very good spot with that, and I'm happy to see it. As now, I just get to be a fan and somebody who clips the stuff for social.
I feel like for you as a producer, you did a good job of, like not making yourself like too much into the show. You know what I mean? Like I feel like there's a lot of podcasts and stuff where the producers like they want to be in it, and even the fans start to point it out, like, hey man, the show's not about you. Why are we seeing you so much? And I feel like it must be tough, right? 'Cause it's such a big platform, and it's like, you in a way you'd want to kind of promote yourself, and at the same time want to, keep the show the way it is, right? Like it must have been tough, sort of find that balance between, not making it too much about yourself, like maybe some other people are doing, if that makes sense.
No, it makes a ton of sense, and it's hard for me to say like, oh, I understand, I get what you're saying, and I didn't want any of that when I'm doing a full hour segment at the end of the show with Ariel.
Yeah.
But I think the way we structured it is very much what you're saying. Like the meat of that show, the MMA hour in its heyday at Fox Media at SB Nation was 5 hours of Ariel talking to fighters. There's not a reason for me to be involved in that at all.
Yeah.
There's not a single reason I could think of that there's anything more important in the MMA world at that moment than Ariel connecting with those people for that long, right? So me stepping back and just producing that is the best value we can provide to MMA fans. If at the end of the show we say, okay, let's have some fun, let's let Ariel decompress a little bit, he can, relax now, and I can jump in and we can provide some opinions and kind of chop it up. That's great, and that's a great outlet. But the focus always remained on Ariel interviewing the fighters, and that's where it needed to be. And if another show is not focused on that, and the idea is, you want to have two people in a room talking about fighting, that's cool too. Like, that's a different format, and that's great. But the focus of that show was always Ariel, fighters, get the best stuff. So it made my job easier to be like, okay, we focus here now, and then at the end of the show, we kind of have a little bit of fun. And it seemed like people enjoyed that. But if they didn't, you know what? That would have been cut too. So I would have just been out.
The more I do stuff like the YouTube and the live streaming and stuff, the more like I watch a show like you guys did with Ariel, and I ask a bunch of questions, but it's like, how on earth can you do that long of a show and have fighters come in on time consistently throughout the show? Because fighters are, I'd say they're a little bit flaky. You'll tell them a certain time, and you'll get a text 20 minutes later, like, "Oh my bad, I was napping," and you're like, "Wait a minute, didn't we have an agreement?" So how difficult was it for you guys? Because you're depending on guys coming in on time, and you have sort of like a time slot, right, to keep everything smooth and transitioning correctly.
Yeah, that was the hardest part, and that was one of my duties. That was one of the things that I was doing personally was anytime we booked somebody, the person that they were going to get a call from was always me. It centralized the communication. Ariel did, his part and made sure that the guest was comfortable and booked and texting them beforehand and all that stuff. When it comes time to actually execute the interview, I'm reaching out to them early saying, hey, here's what we're going to do. Here's the prep. Have a Skype or FaceTime connection, whatever it is, and making sure that they're on time. So that was one of the things that I was doing to keep the show running smoothly, was making sure that our fighters who at times are hard to wrangle, like you mentioned, were ready and able to go. And there were, sometimes they would be late, and sometimes we would have to kind of push things around and rearrange the schedule. But for the most part, because of how neurotic Ariel is about making sure that the guests are going to come, he's always nervous that nobody's going to show up. His dream every Sunday night was that none of the guests would show up, and we'd just have to fill dead air. Now, I think we probably could have done a decent job of that if his nightmare came true. But that was his fear every night. So he made sure that he and I were in lockstep in terms of getting the guests there and getting there on time. So our batting record was pretty good for how many guests we did over the years. But every once in a while, somebody be late. But we tried our best.
So when you call guys up with the Skype and the FaceTime, do you have to also tell them like how to sit or kind of how the background looks? So some fighters, you'll have interviews, they're driving and holding the phone a certain way. I did one interview where the fighter was on the toilet the whole time, and it was kind of like, I'm just glad this is audio. You know what I
Oh
mean? Like
boy.
if you were on a huge platform doing it from the toilet like that, you'd get famous. I mean, you got to give them that, but it'd be strange. Did you have to tell guys sort of like, hey, try to sit in the middle, maybe turn the phone sideways? You know what I mean? Like I assume you had to do a lot of that.
Yeah, there was it more toward the end. Once as the show kind of became more and more popular and more polished, that was a bit of it. Um, you know, we've never had anybody on the toilet. We've had Mike Perry was in a sauna. We've had people driving. We've had people pulled over to the side. I think one time Derek Lewis is in a Best Buy. Fortunately, we've never had anybody on the toilet. But yeah, some of that is kind of that directing stuff. At the end of the day, though, I do think, yes, you want to control that circumstance. Yes, you want to make everything look as clean as possible. But at the end of the day, the conversation is going to drive it, and a little bit of rawness works in your favor sometimes and works against you sometimes. Like if it's terrible, if the conversation's horrible and the person's not paying attention because they're walking around doing something else, it's going to suck.
Yeah.
But sometimes there's just a boring interview where they have a crystal clear Skype and it doesn't matter, right? Like it can look as good as you want it to look, but if the interview is not clicking and that conversation is not exciting, it's not going to do a difference either. So there's kind of that middle ground where you balance like how much can I get this person to kind of clean up what they're doing, combined with like just trusting that this is the right guest, the interview is going to hit, and we're going to do what we need no matter what it looks like. So there's kind of a balance there. But yeah, you want to do that as much as you can. It's a little bit harder with some than others.
I think the worst one for me was I had Andre Fili on, and he was like, so we start the interview, and I'm like, why is he blurry? And he's like, hey, listen, I dropped my phone, my camera's weird, and the whole time he's doing stuff, like half the interview he's making coffee, and so the interview runs long
Yeah.
because half of it is just like, "Gah, gah. Oh yeah, I think
Yeah.
it's gonna be a great fight, and blah blah blah, and it's like so the title ended up being Andre Fili discussed his fight while struggling to make a cup of coffee. It was like we're
Yeah.
gonna try to do whatever we can, but sometimes some guys they'll sit down and you'll look at it and it's like, why is their setup better than mine? And other times it's like, wow, like did you know we were gonna be talking, before you hit your phone? But it's definitely strange.
Yeah, that's a shame, and I'm sure that was a one time because Andre's been on with Ariel tons of times, and he's given great interviews, some really of the most profound interviews. He's a really deep and interesting dude. So I'm sorry to hear that one experience went that way, but yeah, it happens. Like people be walking through CVS picking up prescriptions and stuff, and most of the time, I think because it's Ariel, because they know it's a show that is going to be seen widely, like they'll buckle down most of the time. But it happens. It happens to everybody. Um, but it's funny you mentioned sometimes they have better setups than you. Yeah, any of the gamers, they're
Yeah.
gonna they're gonna blow you out of the water, right? Like they're gonna have the chair, they're gonna have the green screen background. They're just gonna be set up for some bigger things than just the interview. They're ready to do whatever it takes on Twitch.
The one that made me laugh was Ariel. He recently interviewed, Mighty Mouse, and he was like, "You have this
Yeah,
great setup, and you're joining me from your kitchen with, your phone on the counter. Like, what is this?" Like, I thought, I was
yeah,
like, It's right that you call him out. Like, you're on ESPN, and we know you have this great setup made
yeah.
just for that."
Yeah, I'm in a rocking chair in my two daughters' room, so I classed it up for sure.
There we go. Listen, the one thing I like a lot about your social media is your banner on Twitter, like that famous picture of
Thank you.
LeBron. And yeah, every time I happen upon it, I always like take a moment. It's like, what a great picture, what a great moment from LeBron. I mean,
Best.
why is that the official header for a social
Ye-
media guy like yourself?
Oh yeah, for me, so because I'm a Cavs fan, I don't have any teams. I'm a New York guy, so a lot of people give me grief for being a Cavs fan. But I don't have any other teams. I follow football really really closely, but don't have a team. Baseball, I've been kind of in and out over the last couple of years, but don't have a team. Hockey, don't watch, unfortunately. Sorry, don't hate me, hockey fans. Um, and basketball, huge hardcore Cavs fan, stemming back to Sean Kemp, my favorite player. He had a very short stint with the Cavs, not very memorable. One good year and then one not so hot year. But that's why I'm a Cavs fan and always been a Cavs fan. And that LeBron championship year was the sports moment of my life. I couldn't have been happier. But when he ice grilled Steph Curry after blocking him, it was one of the coldest things I've ever seen in my life. And so that moment, the fact that they got that picture from that angle Made me so happy. So yeah, LeBron grilling down Steph Curry after blocking his shot is my Twitter header forever until the Cavs have a better moment, and I don't know if they will.
No, I'm pretty confident when I say
Yeah,
looking at the Cavs, like, nah. But I mean, they have like a fun little team. I don't want to be like a good team because everybody knows season starts off one way and then it goes bad. But there's a few exciting players on that team. What's the backcourt called? It's like Sex something.
Sexland, baby.
Sexland. There you go.
Uh, wow, I'm on the spot right now. I could talk MMA all day when it comes to basketball. I'm getting flustered. Darius Garland and Colin Sexton,
Yeah.
Sexland backcourt. Yeah, they're young, they're exciting, and they have some other pieces as well. Okoro is super exciting, and Jetty Osman, who's been on the team for a long time, but still super young. Like he was a rookie with the Cavs and been with the Cavs his whole career, but he's still super young and an up and coming talent. They've got a lot of pieces, and they've got veterans like Drummond and they got veterans like Kevin Love that kind of fill that out. I wouldn't like you. I'm a little cautious to call them good. They might be competing for a play-in spot, at the end of the year. I could see that happening. But they have a future for once. Ever since LeBron and Kyrie left, they didn't have a future. It didn't seem like there was anything that they were kind of building toward. They were just kind of like assembling pieces, and they had a coach that really didn't work in Beeline. So yeah, it's an exciting time for the Cavs. I don't know how much anybody who follows MMA is going to care about that, but go Cavs.
If it makes you feel any better, I understand exactly the position you're in because I'm right now I'm in North Carolina, so as you can imagine, you got to support the Hornets, and it's like it's literally the exact same thing, right? Where you're
Yeah,
like cautiously optimistic, but we
yeah,
love to overpay people, and then Batum leaves, and all of a sudden he's kind of good for the Clippers, and it's like what the
that's
hell,
true.
like it's been a tough grind being a Hornets fan as well.
Yeah, they got some players though. They got some players. I like what the Hornets are doing there.
I mean, the crazy thing is I feel like we could have, like, 5 point guards, like, our 3 best players are all point guards. It's like,
That's true.
and that's such a Michael Jordan front office thing to do. It's like, and then people are talking about, "Okay, you need to trade this guy," and then, Terry Rozier goes out there and has an amazing game. It's like, "Alright, we'll
Yeah,
trade Devontae." Devontae starts shooting well, and it's like, "Okay, I don't know. We really don't know what to do. Let's just all out point guards."
yeah. Listen, sometimes you gotta ride it. You gotta keep the best talent and wait for those opportunities, and then something will come. All of a sudden, a James Harden becomes available, and maybe one of those point guards goes somewhere, and you get James Harden. So gotta keep the talent, gotta keep the assets.
I mean, there's no way. I mean, I don't Charlotte's not known for the nightclubs, like, really a James
The
Harden for
nightlife's
Charlotte,
not
I
good
don't think
enough.
yeah, I don't think so, but
That's funny.
last thing on the Cavs though, because I remember the
Yeah,
2018 team. Somehow LeBron drags another shitty Cavs team to the finals. And when I say shitty again, like 2007, but and
yeah,
then they go out there and all of a sudden it's like, wow, swept the Raptors, and then they get swept, and it's like, oh yeah, that's right. There,
yeah.
if they hadn't made all those trades and they'd kept like veterans like Derrick Rose and Wade, who weren't in their prime, but I feel like they would have been good contributors in the playoffs. Could the series have been maybe 5 games instead of 4?
No, no. Um, so the year before that, they took it to 5, right? That was the
Yeah,
year
that
that
was a grind.
yeah, that was the year that they had the one good game. And funny enough, I went to that one good game in Cleveland. I was debating whether I should go or not because they were down 3-0, and I was like, do I want to go fly all the way to Cleveland and watch them
Oh
get
yeah.
swept potentially? But fortunately, Kyrie and LeBron put up like 40 pieces each and were nasty, and that was the one game they won. No, those the Cavs teams that were the best were the year that they beat the Warriors, and then the year after that, actually, that team was probably better. The year that I was talking about, that I went to that finals game,
Yeah,
that team was actually better. But because the Warriors had added Kevin Durant by that point, it was inconsequential. Like that team was just too good. The team the year after that, you
yeah.
described it perfectly. LeBron dragged them to the finals. They weren't going to do jack squat once they got there. That was all a LeBron extends his final streak. Oh my God, I can't believe it.
Yeah.
Season. The rest of it was like, yeah, any Cavs fan can tell you that they knew that was over after they got to the finals.
Well, the crazy thing is anytime people are like, "Your second best player is Jeff Green," like, that's a problem. Like, that is not a
Yeah,
good like, people are like, "Jeff Green's the best behind LeBron." Oh, no. Like,
yeah,
"Oh,
that's
man, this is not gonna end well."
that's tough. Jeff Green's had some big Cavs games,
Yeah.
but throughout his career, Jeff Green hasn't been known to be the best number 2 guy.
Yeah, no, and especially you look at it, it's like, wait, but you still have Kevin Love, and but if they had Kyrie, last day, if they had Kyrie, would it have been a little bit better? Because Kyrie, things were weird in Boston, injuries and stuff, but he was still an excellent player.
It would have made a difference to have Kyrie. I don't think it would have changed that finals. Kyrie's great. Kyrie's fantastic, but they didn't have as good a team chemistry by that point. Who knows what Kyrie, like how Kyrie would have been feeling? Like Kyrie
Yeah,
was already like on the outs with the Cavs at that point. They probably could have kept him. I mean, that's what we're seeing in Houston right now. James Harden is still in Houston. They're not rushing to trade him. But yeah, who knows? I just don't think they had the chemistry. I don't think they had the firepower. They didn't have the depth that they had the 2 years previously. So yeah, I couldn't have seen them winning. And to be honest, they won that title in 16, and it's just like, all right, great, I'm good for the rest of my life. That's
yeah.
all I care about. We got that one over the 73-9 Warriors.
But it's so historic, everything about it. 73-9 Warriors coming back from 3-1. LeBron
Yeah.
has a huge block. Kyrie has the game-winning shot. Like everything about it. It's like if you made a
You
movie.
forgot the Kevin Love stop, the
And
stop
the
on
Kevin
Steph
and
Curry.
Kevin Love playing defense for some reason. Yeah, there we go. It was everything about that was like if you made a movie, you'd do all of those things.
Yeah, yeah. It was better than a movie for sure. I couldn't believe it.
I mean, I can relate a little bit with, obviously I'm French, so watching France win the World Cup in 2018, it was one of those moments where you're like, wow, like this is huge. And then, I was there when they won in 1998, but I wasn't one yet. So, it's like I watched it, but do you really want to count that at that point? But it's definitely there's a sense of I don't know if it's pride, but it's definitely cool that watching your team get to that pinnacle, and it's like wow, like I watched all the games, I watched that happen, like this is a historic moment.
Yeah, if you've been living and dying with it, it's unbelievable. I know how I felt. I can only imagine how somebody who's like a Cleveland sports fan who lives in Cleveland, follows the Browns, Indians, or sorry, Cleveland baseball team. I don't want to say that because I think they're changing the name. I believe
Something like
um,
that.
Cleveland baseball team and Cavaliers. I could only imagine how somebody like that feels. Like that their Cleveland sports misery is finally over thanks to LeBron and the Cavaliers beating the 73-9 Warriors after being down 3-1. It must have been euphoric. And I know, obviously I have some relationships with Cavs fans who do live in Cleveland. They've told me how special it is. But yeah, that feeling, it's unmistakable. And I think a lot of people have that with fighters to kind of bring it back to MMA. Like there's people who just like, you see that guy have their first, even not even UFC fight, but first fight, like for, a regional promotion. And then you follow them all the way up and they win the title in the UFC. People following that journey, there's nothing more special in sports than that kind of fandom.
And to be fair, that wasn't the only 2016 Cleveland championship, of course, with our very famous,
That's
OA
right.
from everyone's favorite wordsmith, Stipe Miocic, getting that one done
That's
too. And I
right.
think he was a part of the parade and everything. So he lived up to expectations.
Yeah, he was a part of the parade. He was in one of the main vehicles. Cleveland was super proud of him, obviously. Funny enough, one of my colleagues at ESPN named Tessa Hirsch, who works on the MMA social side, worked at the UFC at that point, and she was with Stipe for that Cavs parade. And I hate her for that. I'm so jealous. I can't get over it. She rubs it in my face from time to time whenever I'm kind of being a little bit bratty, but I'll never forgive her for being in the Cavs parade and me never even sniffing that or having the opportunity to do that. So shout out to Tessa, but I will forever hold that against you.
I mean, Stipe is one of the nice guys in MMA, like one of the best characters. But I can't help but love all the jokes about the way he talks. Like when people put like in the comments, it's just like garbled nonsense. So talking about Stipe, like it just makes me laugh every time. I think it's so funny. Like there's certain inside MMA jokes that you just can't help but laugh at, like the Jeremy Stevens and McGregor and stuff like that. Like it's cheap, but you have to enjoy it.
Yeah, that's one of the things I do love about MMA though is like the community, the culture that's built. And we were talking about having not having MMA people like all over our lives in real life, but online, there's such a tight knit, there's such a close community. Those kind of memes, those kind of in jokes, they spread and everybody knows them. Stipe, being a little bit of a marble mouth is definitely one of them. But it's funny. One of the things that we did last year was after Stipe beat Cormier, we did a compilation of Stipe just like being funny at the post-fight press conference, which is a side of
Yeah.
Stipe that I don't think a lot of people see, and that did super well for us because Stipe is kind of like a little bit buttoned up, a little bit like hey, I'm going to do this interview because I have to, because it's part of the job. And then I'm going to go home and be with my family. And he's exactly what he says he is. You know, he's just a family man, a firefighter, fights because he wants to be the best, but he's not interested in the spotlight and all those things that come with, you know, the trappings of being champion. He just wants to show he's the best. And then he wants to go home and be with his family and be with his fellow firefighters. So he does have a tendency to just kind of like talk, 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 talk. Maybe you heard me, maybe you didn't, and now I'm going to
Right.
get out of here. But that compilation we did of him being funny ended up doing really well because I think people are craving that. They're like, we don't get a lot of
Yeah.
like Stipe just kind of like sitting down, being slow, and being funny.
I mean, Stipe has a lot of Lucas points because throwback to, I believe it was Thanksgiving 2015, a young MMA fan, asked Stipe Miocic, like, can I have a follow back on Twitter? Which I really hope. I've since deleted that tweet 'cause now that I actually cover MMA. It's like all that. I have to go back, find all the fan stuff and try to get rid of it and make it seem like it was a genuine, oh, I enjoy Lucas's content. But sure enough, I look and there's a little blue check mark in my notification. Stipe Miocic followed you. And I was like, wow. And I mean, it's today, it's like, oh, cool. Yeah. I mean, I grind. Like of course it's gonna follow me. But back then that was like, you just running around like Stipe Miocic. And that was even before he was champion.
Yeah, I think the days of like not being able to be a fan in journalism are harder these days. Like the rules of being in the press box and that type of stuff, they're harder to do just because of how young people start, in their careers being journalists. Like I'm sure in 2015 you were a super young man just trying to get, a follow from one of your favorite fighters. And um I don't think we can hold that against people as long as they're journalistically sound. You know what I mean? Like as long as that doesn't impact how you cover Stipe Miocic, as long as that doesn't impact how you talk to him in interviews. Like I think it's okay these days for people to be fans. You see Ariel now in 2021 and even more recently than that though, but being a huge Bills and Knicks and this and that fan, and also talking about at the same time on the MMA side his relationship with Daniel Cormier and how they became friendly, even as he was a fighter. It's harder and harder. As long as you're doing your job, I think people can understand that. Naturally, we just have to be fans of certain athletes and certain teams.
I mean, I did reach a point as I started, covering MMA and doing more interviews where, I was like 19 or 20 when I started. Like you
Yeah,
watch interviews from a year ago, it's like you can literally still see this guy growing. And I realized like, okay, I have to sit down and I have to, as young as I am, I have to up the professionalism because people are
yeah.
automatically going to assume you've got this glorified fan, like, oh my God, I can talk to Stipe. Like I was like, you know what? I might be young, but that's the thing I'm gonna have to do is make sure that my professionalism is at the same level as some of the bigger guys, whether, I'm on that level or not. Like it's important that just that my age isn't something that hurts me in the long run because, it is silly. You look back on it, like it's like imagine, you work for something crazy like ESPN and then somebody uncovers a tweet of, hey, can I get a follow back? It's like you're gonna look terrible. You're gonna look terrible. But I did have to kind of sit down and it's like, all right, we have to up the professionalism. And especially with me talking to fighters, I was like, I'm gonna have to put some of the fan things, like, being a fan of a specific fighter and stuff like that. You can't do that anymore. And I still see a ton of people do it. And I'm like, I shouldn't be younger than you, doing that. And you're older than me, you've done it longer than I have. And you are legitimately a fan of these fighters and you openly say it on social media.
Yeah, you have to put that to the side. You have to, if you're gonna work, if you're gonna do, actual work and be proud of it in the sport, there's certain guys you're gonna be fans of and girls that you're gonna be fans of. There's certain ones that you're not, but you have to treat them the same way. When it comes to the job, when it comes to the professionalism of it. You're not rooting for one or the other. You're talking to both, or you're interacting with both, and you're covering it with that in mind. So yeah, no, it's a good lesson to learn, especially at an age as young as yours. Like just to know, to be able to have that sense to be able to do that. But I will say, I don't think anybody's gonna hold a 2015 tweet against you asking Stipe for a follow. As long as in the time since you've spoken to Stipe's opponents and treated it the same way as speaking to Stipe, I don't think anybody's gonna hold it too hard against you.
Yeah, yeah, do the whole interview like, how dare you want to punch my man Stipe?
Yeah,
He followed
exactly.
me in 2015. What is wrong with you? Yeah,
My my best friend Stipe Miocic, who followed me in 2015.
yeah, and
Yeah.
then I bet you ask Stipe about it and be like, "Who?" And be like, "Ah, my heart, Stipe, don't do me like that."
That's funny.
Well, that was the thing too. Like, yeah, I say it on the podcast a lot. Like, I had sort of an interaction with Kevin Holland where he kind of insulted me and stuff. And then somebody was like, could we sit you guys down and do like, Magic Johnson and Isaiah Thomas kind of sit down? And I'd be like, listen, Kevin Holland's gonna be like, who is this guy? What happened? And I was like, am I really gonna have to sit down and explain it to him? Like, these guys. It's like these guys don't remember shit like that. Like that would look so bad on my part. Like, Kevin, you sent me a mean text message. I don't appreciate it. Like, people like create these stories, and it's like in reality, like nobody, especially fighters as busy as they are, they don't even remember it.
Well, it's important. You make a great point, and it's important to remember. Like at the end of the day, the story isn't about you, right? It's about Kevin
Right.
Holland.
Exactly.
Like Kevin
Yeah.
Holland is the subject. Kevin Holland is the fighter. He's the one whose career is continuing in the MMA space, and making the story about you and Kevin Holland takes away from kind of like what that is. Now,
Exactly.
is there a time and place? You're interviewing Kevin Holland again. All of a sudden, you guys make amends, and you're like, "Hey, remember that time?" That's great content. I'd want to watch that. I'd want to hear that. But to go out of the way to make that the story is a different thing than just saying like, hey, Kevin's going to do his thing. He's the
Exactly.
focus, and that's that. But if you guys ever do sit down, Kevin Holland is one of the fighters that I enjoy his interviews and his trash talk and his banter, even in the cage, very, very much. So if you and Kevin Holland end up doing that, let me know, because I would like to see that.
Could you imagine how bad I'd get killed by someone like Kevin Holland, like who has he doesn't hesitate at all. Like he's
No,
gonna
no
say it.
filter.
I mean, you'd get cooked right there in front of everyone, and then you'd be like, what? Why did I agree to do that? Like, I was minding my own business, and now people know who I am, and it's not it's not because of a good thing.
No, Kevin Holland has no filter. He'll fire off shots. Very good on social media too about making call outs and calling his shots, and he's not afraid to say anything. But at the end of the day, and actually, funny enough, Kevin Holland's an example of one of those guys who Ariel. There was some kind
Yeah,
of
yeah,
miscommunication. I think something with his grandfather,
yeah,
and
yeah.
now they talk regularly. Like it always happens that way. But Kevin Holland's a good dude. Kevin Holland's a nice, good dude. I don't imagine he's holding too much of a grudge. I think you guys would hit it off.
Okay, I've got people that try to egg me on, stupidly, like, tell him good luck before his fight, do this.
Yeah,
Like, no, like I'm gonna leave the man alone to do his thing.
yeah,
Like, he doesn't need
yeah,
me on his ass trying to create content, just for
mm,
clout.
yeah. He's a good dude though.
But you mentioned the thing with Ariel because I did watch that interview and he said like, his grandfather came up to Ariel and,
Hmm.
told him, "Do you want to interview my grandson?" or something like that. And Ariel was like, "Nah, maybe in the future," or something like that. Which do you believe that story? Because I remember listening
Well,
to I was a little bit skeptical about it.
it's important to say that he said that that Ariel said. Ariel, we don't know what happened there, right? Like I wasn't there.
Right.
Only Kevin, his grandfather, and Ariel know what happened there.
Yeah.
But Kevin Holland said that Ariel told his grandfather, when he's bigger, or something
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Like one day it happened. I don't know. I don't believe. I I think it's probably a misunderstanding because I can't imagine a scenario where Ariel would respond to anybody, period, but especially a UFC fighter who's on the rise about
Yeah.
like, yeah, one day he's somebody who Ariel would have regularly on the show. Like if he hadn't had him to that point, but he would obviously have had and been interested in having Kevin Holland. So I can't imagine a scenario where it was exactly that. I'm not. Believe me, I don't want to get in trouble with. I believe Kevin calls him
Right.
pops. I don't want to get in trouble with
No.
pops.
No.
Pop. Nobody. Pops says what pops is going to say. I ain't going to change pops' mind. I'm not going to say nothing. But I'm sure it was a misunderstanding. I doubt it was exactly that. And yeah, they've spoken since. And Ariel always reminds Kevin and wants to hear from pops. He wants to talk to pops. That's what he really wants to do, and get it sorted out. But no, Kevin has since softened his stance, and they've been good. They've done some good interviews.
I love how Ariel, it's like no matter what the fighter says to him, like Ariel's not backing down from it. You know what I mean? Like he's not getting intimidated. He's like, all right, let's hash it out. Let's talk about it.
Yeah,
Bring Pops on the show. Let's figure out what the issue is. Like I just love like the confidence because I think fighters, they see the media and sort of wimpy and stuff. Like I'm gonna say
yeah.
something to you, and someone like Ariel is like, no, let's do it. Let's talk about it. What happened? And then all of a sudden, it's like, whoa, hold on. Like now we're gonna have to actually hash it out and talk about it more.
At the end of the day, I think there's a comfort, right? Like Ariel knows that these are professional men and women, right? Like he knows that they're not, rare cases aside, he knows that they're not interested in making this like a bigger escalation that it is, right? It's not going to get physical. Nobody's getting, truly physically hurt or anything like that. So if they can talk out the issue and figure out, what's going on, most of the time it ends up just being they're friends now. End of the day, it all gets sorted out, and they're friends now. So Ariel's always willing to take that. If somebody has something that they think he did that, they're aggrieved by, and they feel upset about, he'll listen. He'll say, okay, talk me through this. Like, let's hear it. And then they'll ultimately kind of come together. But yeah, no, I mean, it's a different scenario if somebody's trying to like intimidate and like truly like take this to an escalation where it's beyond like, hey, let's talk about this. I don't think, anybody's interested in that. But if all it takes is a conversation, Ariel's always game to have that.
Well, as soon as you started saying the confrontation stuff, you made me think of Mayhem Miller when he was doing that famous interview where he was trying to be in character and he started throwing stuff around. I don't know how real it is, but I think they did an interview where they were walking around a park or something later on, which is some of
Yeah,
Ariel's best content when he just takes a walk with the fighter.
yeah,
But that must have been a pretty scary situation for everyone, especially because he's not exactly the most stable guy in MMA.
yeah. It was real. It was very real. I can
Yeah,
assure you. I was there. It was very real. Um, but it was real in the sense that Mayhem was in character and was not leaving character at that moment. Like,
yeah.
he was fully Lucky Patrick from that movie, Here Comes the Boom. He was in that character and he was not getting out of it. It wasn't real from the sense that, like, I don't think for one second he believed he was Lucky Patrick. In fact, he told me before the interview, he's like, I'm going to be Lucky Patrick from now until the end of this. So,
Yeah.
that's what it's going to be. He told me that heading into the studio. Um, and he was playing that character and he played it, as best as he possibly could, and then ran out of the studio and Ariel kind of followed him. But yeah, those moments can get intense for sure. Like, no matter what, like, even if he's playing a character, those moments can get intense because he's fully committed to this thing. And there have been moments, Rampage is just getting in Ariel's face and all these things, but Ariel does a good job. He stands his ground. And yeah, at the end of the day, ultimately none of these things came to any like true,
Yeah.
physical altercation type situation, which is a credit to the athletes, is a credit to Ariel. Like, cooler heads always prevail, and I find that we typically have more in common, and most of the time those things come out.
And so you work for, of course, the great ESPN, where you're creating content for the social media channels and stuff like that. What was your strategy going into there? Because you kind of had to start from scratch. Like, obviously, you attach
Hmm.
ESPN to MMA, like people are going to follow automatically, but you still have to make content that isn't just promoting ESPN stuff. Like, because you do a good job of, we get quotes from interviews, and I know there was one guy who had an interview with and unfortunately I forget his name. He did the interview with the fighter that Hamza knocked his tooth out, right? And he was like, "Oh my God, ESPN, used my
Yeah.
quotes and gave me credit." It was like, so you guys, how do you go about finding like what are we going to put on our social media that people are going to actually like and interact with?
Yeah, we kind of are just fans of the sport, right? So like, I start as somebody who loves MMA, and I would have been consuming this content, um and looking at Reddit, looking at Twitter, following fighters, doing all that stuff anyway, just because I'm such, a fan of the sport, and love it so much, and always kind of want to know what's going on. So that helps me have a good sense of what are people talking about. What's the top thread on Reddit for that day? What's the conversation on Twitter that's the most retweeted at the moment? All those things give me a good sense of kind of like what's everybody talking about. So I fold that into a little bit of making sure that we are doing our part, or as a partner of the UFC, of promoting the fights that are upcoming, covering the fights that are upcoming, because we have rights to those highlights, which is an opportunity that's tremendous for our account, and ESPN has that. We utilize the highlights on Fight Night, and do that stuff. But yeah, we also really like think it's important. The account is ESPN MMA. The account is not ESPN UFC. So
Yeah.
when an important Bellator moment is coming up, or even Ryzen, we posted the Horiguchi win from New Year's Eve recently. When there's an important moment in the sport that is not related to the UFC, we want to make sure that we're covering it as best as we can. Now, um, I'd be lying if I said that everything gets equal time, right? Like, the UFC is the biggest the biggest league in the sport, and so we have to dedicate more time and resources to that. But we do not ignore other promotions. We do not ignore other big moments. You'll see a lot of regional knockouts. You'll see from CFFC, or you'll see from LFA, or you'll see from even like a local show, Bellator. It's all in the page, and we try to cover whatever everybody's talking about in MMA. But our number one driving principle is, what do fans want to see? Like, it's driven exclusively like by that. Like, if this is the topic that everybody's talking about in MMA right now, if it's John versus Israel, if it's Habib and Dana having a conversation, if he's going to come back, whatever it is, That's what we will focus in on, and that's what we'll dedicate our time to. So I think we do a good job of that. Our growth in the last 2 years has really been tremendous, and people have taken to it, and I'm super thankful for that. But I feel like that has been a guiding principle that has served us well, is to make sure we're giving fans what they want.
And so when we say social media, I think we think like Twitter, Instagram, and all that stuff. Are you doing the YouTube channel as well, or is that somebody else?
So that's a great question. I'm not. We have a separate dedicated YouTube team. So there's a YouTube team that handles that. We also have a Snapchat team where we have MMA programming. There's an MMA show that is completely separate. Me and my team are responsible for Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. There's also a ESPN TikTok channel where MMA where MMA stuff
TikTok.
appears, but we don't program that either. Like we kind of coordinate with some of our colleagues on the social team. Um, Not a fan of TikTok, huh?
No, I'm a grown man. Well, and people don't always believe me when I say that, but during quarantine, I had people from college like, "Oh, I got TikTok." I was like, "You're an adult. Like, what are you doing? What is this?"
So I certainly do feel I am. I'm 33 years old. I definitely feel like I'm older than the audience that is consuming TikTok. But one of the things I'll say, for my job, I need to know what's happening. I need to
Yeah,
know what the
yeah,
trends are. I need to know, like, TikTok, for to its credit, um, is where a lot of culture is kind of starting these days, at least on social media. Like a lot of trends, a lot of things that people are then taking over to Instagram Reels started on TikTok, and there's lots of things that are on there content wise that are valuable. So I definitely think having my finger on the pulse of TikTok is good, but my personal account, I don't imagine I'll ever post from there. I'm too old for the demographic. It's not my style.
all right. Before we let you go, though, I have to ask
Yeah,
you. You're a social media expert in MMA, right? Obviously, when you work for ESPN, there's a certain, you're at a certain level when it comes to that. What's
sure.
the biggest piece of advice you'd give someone in terms of building their personal social media? And I'm sure I know what you're gonna say. It's like, it's finding engaging content that people want to
Yeah.
interact with. But what's like something like specific, like maybe the average person hasn't thought about, and then when you say it, it's like, oh wow, I didn't even think of that.
So I'm going to give the cliche answer first, and then I'll give you a better answer. So the cliche
Okay.
answer is what you said: is engaging content, being authentic, like just not trying to like run the account in a way that's not sustainable, right? Like, because there can be a tendency, if you're doing a character or doing a bit or doing something that's not really authentic to like what you're trying to build long term, you can run out of stuff quickly, right? You just run out of options, you run out of things to do. Like if you're doing a character, eventually that character has a limitation and you can't do the things that you want to do. So being confident in what you are and what you're trying to build, alongside engaging content. The answer I will say that is not as cliched as those is look for other accounts that you're following that are doing things that you like, and learn from that, study that, learn from that, but don't do that. Don't do the same thing that everybody else is doing. There's a very high tendency, and I've been guilty of this many, many times in my life and in my career, of saying, "Oh, I see what they're doing, so let me do that. Let me replicate that." That's a recipe for failure most of the time. A, they've done it before you, so they already beat you to market, and B, they're probably doing it better than you just because they have better reps. If you really think you can get them off the corner, if you really think you can do it better than them in the long term, sure, pursue it, figure it out. But more realistically, I think do something different. Do something that is not what everybody else is doing. If you're doing interviews, try to have some kind of different way that you're conducting them. Find a different way to package them, whatever it is. If you're doing social media, don't run the account the same way ESPN MMA is doing it, or MMA Junkie is doing it, or some of your favorite journalists are doing it. Find your take on it. Find a different way to kind of approach that is not exactly the same. Learn from it. Don't ignore it, because then you're setting yourself up for failure again. Learn from what other people are doing and do something completely different. Do your own take on that. Do your own version of that.
There we go. That was the free advice. A little bit
Hmm.
selfish on my part because my curiosity, but you have to, right? You host this show, you have to. Listen, before I let you go, though, I always like to let
Yeah.
people, that you have social media stuff like that. If you have anything you want to plug, anything you want to shout out, now would be the time.
Yeah. Don't My personal handles, whatever, like I barely use them anymore. Follow ESPN MMA if you're not already, on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, Snapchat, all the places. Follow ESPN MMA. That's where I'm putting in my work. That's where my passion is right now. So that's where you're going to see the best stuff.
There we go. Well, thanks so much for the time, sir. I really appreciate it. This was definitely some good stuff.
No, thank you. Thank